Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, students. I hope all of you would be fine at your homes and would be making best of your times during this Corona vacation. In continuation of the series of the lectures on Pride and Prejudice, in this video we will further discuss some of the remaining chapters of the novel Pride and Prejudice. Our today's chapter in discussion is chapter number 47. Before continuing our today's lecture, I will recapitulate the last uh, thing that happened and the major event that happened in the previous chapter, that was of the elopement, that was the news of the elopement of Vikram and Lydia. Lydia and Vikram eloped in order to get married, but we uh, get this information from some other characters that Vikram has no intentions of marrying Lydia. Instead, he just wants to uh, mint some money from Lydia. Therefore, he has eloped with that girl, and this silly girl has taken a great step that may bring some infamy to Banners and slur their noble name. Let's see in this chapter what happens. In the chapter number 47, in the carriage while coming back home, Mr. Gardner wonders if Jane might be right in hoping for the best. Jane, who is still hoping for the best, that best might happen if they find Lydia and Wickham over there and they to get married, Lydia and Wickham, because Wickham knows Lydia has no money and stands to lose his reputation with his regiment. So what else could be he be after but marriage? As we have come to this resolution that Mr. Vikram is always after money, he is after some always after some material gain. What is he after this time? As he knows, Lydia has no money, and by eloping with Lydia, by running off with Lydia, he is actually risking his reputation with the regiment. So, what would be his gain this time? Elizabeth assures them that Wickham is an awful person, capable of anything. कि वो एक ऐसा आदमी है, वो कुछ भी कर सकता है. You can unpredictable है. You can't say that he is doing this thing for this cause or for that cause, for that purpose or this purpose. He could do anything for any purpose or any cause or reason. Elizabeth knows since Elizabeth knows from Darcy's story that Wickham has no morals and is therefore capable of anything. A person who does not have any morals can do anything. एक कुरान शरीफ की आयत है, उसका तर्जुमा है कि जब अल्लाह ताला इंसान से फरमाते हैं, और ये बड़ी एक इंसान को दहला देने वाली बात है, अगर आप इंसान इसको थोड़ा सा भी सोच ले, गौर कर ले इसके ऊपर, कि जब तुम्हारी नज़र में हया बाकी ना रहे तो जो मर्जी करते फिरो. जब इंसान बेशर्म हो जाए तो फिर उसको किस चीज़ की परवाह है. इंसान बेहया हो जाए, उसके दिल में से, आँख में से वो हया मर जाए, शर्म ना रहे, बस फिर बात खत्म. फिर इंसान की वो जो झिझक दूर हो जाती है, फिर जो मर्ज़ी करो. बात वो झिझक तक होती है. जिस इंसान का कोई मॉरल नहीं है, तो उसको क्या है कि मैं ये करूँगा तो ऐसा ना हो जाए, वो क्या सोचेगा? ये तो उन लोगों की बातें होती हैं, जिनके पास मोरालिटी होती है, जिनके कोई मॉरल्स होते हैं, या कोई शर्म, शेम, ग्रेस वगैरह की बात हो. तो सिंस ही डज़ नॉट डू, वैसे उसने जो है ना आदतें पाली नहीं हुई जहाँ पे शर्म वगैरह महसूस करनी पड़े. ओनली मैरिइंग हिम कैन सेव Lydia's reputation and that of her entire families as well. So it is now Lydia's earnest desire or could some or dire need at this time as well to marry him. So from Vikram's part, we are not sure why did he elope with Lydia. At Longbourn, Mrs. Bennet is holed up in her room like a rat, frantic with nervousness, and blames Colonel Foster for not watching over Lydia. See Mrs. Bennet's attitude. She tells Mr. Gardner to make Lydia and Wickham marry when they are found, and to make Lydia consult her about finding the best deals on the wedding dresses. This is a very bad and frivolent uh, example of a bad parenting or a bad mother. She is posing to be frantic with nervousness, blaming Mr. Colonel Foster, who is an outsider, to keep a watch on Lydia, and he is also counseling a kind a thing presenting here or advising him to make where she is asking to make Lydia consult about finding the best deals on wedding dress. वो भाग के गई है, शादी नहीं हो रही उसकी, उसको कह रही है अच्छा सा ड्रेस बनवाना उसके लिए शादी के लिए. इसके अंदर there is no sense of shame in this woman, this old woman, Mrs. Bennet. She is a shameless creature. Mrs. Bennet always tries to keep herself in the right. So she shifts the blame on on Colonel Foster rather than herself. And she is just as superficial and frivolous as ever. However, she can worry about dress at the same time like this. How can she be worry about the dress at this very moment about the bride's dress or bridal dress? शी हैज eloped. वो भाग के गई है घर से और ये यहाँ पर ड्रेस का सोच रही है कि ड्रेस कैसा होना चाहिए. अंदर से ना कहीं से ये खुश भी है, ये मिसेस बेनेट, अच्छा हुआ एक लड़की भाग की शादी हो जाएगी. ये ऐसी डेस्परेट है, अपने बच्चे को किसी भी एक्सटेंट तक जा सकती है. शी कैन गो टू any extent of shamelessness, Mrs. Bennet. Elizabeth and Jane dissect the situation. They immediately understand what has happened. They are relieved that apparently Lydia think that she was getting married, which they can tell from a note she left for Mrs. Foster signed Lydia Wickham. This is the very note which is somewhat comforting for the uh, ladies at home. She sent a note where she mentions her name as Lydia Wickham, which signifies that she is going to be married. Otherwise, there was some hopelessness in the ladies or disappointment behind. But the manner in which she presented herself or lower herself for marriage is shameless, is or so shameful and a very controversial one. If Lydia had not intended to marry and was just after a sexual fling with Mr. Wickham, she would be seen as indecent, fallen woman. So, since she wants to marry Mr. Wickham, therefore she has eloped with him. But if it does not happen to be as she has designed, what would happen? There would be a great disgrace for the family. In the name of family, the name of family will be tainted, and it is a great uh, great mm, disgrace. I would say again the same word, disgrace, for the family, and a great damage for the rest of the girls of the family. In the next chapter, chapter number 48, we see Longbourn buzzes with the news. It comes out that Wickham incurred serious debts in Meryton as well as gambling debts at Brighton. Where here we see news buzzing around, where and news that is uh, doing rumors is that Wickham incurred serious debts in Meryton as well as gambling debts at Brighton. तो उसने बड़े ही डेट्स उसके ऊपर चढ़ गए हुए कर्जे, मैरिटन में भी और ब्राइटन दोनों इलाकों में. or everyone duped by becomes genial manners and handsome appearance everywhere at Brighton as well as at Meryton. Mr. and Mrs. Gardner search hotels in London and to no avail. Mr. Gardner suggests that Elizabeth ask for help from anyone related to Wickham. Mr. Gardiner implies that Elizabeth should ask Darcy for help, but she is too embarrassed to ask any help from Mr. Darcy. And how can she go for help for this kind of thing from Mr. Darcy? It's a very embarrassing position for her to ask for some help to seek her sister's suitor who has eloped with her sister. A letter arrives from Mr. Collins from Rosings. He offers condolences but spends most of the letter underlining how Lydia's heinous offense will ruin the other Bennet girls' chances at marriage. Marriage was a very sensitive issue at that time, as we know. It is repeatedly been mentioned, repeatedly been discussed, and up till now we are very much familiar uh, with the sensitivity of this thing, marriage. So you can imagine being in Pakistan or being in subcontinental culture, we also very much aware of this uh, fact of this thing, that how can be heinous or how can be disastrous thing this to this thing for a girl's family. When a girl elopes with someone, what would happen with the remaining girls at the home? घर पे बाकी लोगों के साथ, बाकी लड़कियों के साथ उनका फ्यूचर तो बैठे बिठाए खराब हो गया ना एक बंदे की हरकत की वजह से। शादियों का हालात वैसे ही बड़े खराब थे वहां। मिस्टर कॉलन एड्स दैट लेडी कैथरीन एग्रीज विद हिम, और उसने ये बात करना मुनासिब समझी और भूला नहीं कि लेडी कैथरीन भी इस बात पर मुत्तफिक हैं कि बाकी लड़कियों का चांस तो गया। Lydia's actions are an extreme breach of rank and polite behavior, both of which are extremely important to Mr. Colin and Lady Catherine. We see why these actions are very important for Lady Catherine in particular. More time passes, but all attempts to find Wickham and Lydia fail, and Mr. Bennett returns home empty handed without having Lydia along with him. He asks Elizabeth not to talk with him about Lydia, saying that he brought this on and only he should suffer. कहता है ये मेरी वजह से चूंकि हुआ है तो मैं ही अकेला सफर करूंगा, मैं जिम्मेदार हूँ। Now he realizes his fault as a bad parent when his daughter was asking him to stop the girl from going somewhere else without him, without any male partner, male member of the family, and he took his refuge in his usual senior, usual comfort zone. Now he realizes the price that he's going to pay. Mr. Bennett realizes his fault in the matter, but tries to remain isolated from his family. Again, a bad thing. He isolated himself from the family in this very situation where he need to be active. उसको वहां अब तो कुछ करना चाहिए ना, नहीं जी मेरा फॉल्ट है क्या कि पीछे हट गया। He does not realize that everyone will suffer, just not him. उसके ये कहने से कुछ नहीं फर्क पड़ता, it is my fault therefore I only will suffer, everybody will go to suffer, will suffer the situation. He is not alone in this situation, but again he is doing the same job or same thing by saying that he's no more be touched in this way. I don't want to say anything on this matter because it was my fault and let me suffer alone. But he is still blind to the present situation where he is not alone in suffering. Everybody is suffering. Or if he does not do anything, the more music will have to face, will have to be faced by other family members. In the chapter 49, 2 days later, a letter arrives from Mr. Gardner, who is in London. Lydia and Wickham have been found. It's a good news that they have been found. पकड़े गए, लब गए, यहाँ पे भागे हुए थे. मोस्टली पाकिस्तान में तो जोड़े कराची भागे जाते हैं, लाहौर ये इधर से ही पकड़े गए, लंदन वहां पे जाते होंगे तो लंदन से पकड़े गए. They are not married yet, but will be provided that Mr. Bennett pay Wickham a small amount every year. अभी उनकी शादी नहीं हुई और ये कि मिस्टर बेनेट पे विकम अ स्मॉल अमाउंट एवरी ईयर, उसके कुछ डेट्स हैं, वो डेट्स जो है मिस्टर विकम बेनेट को पे करना होंगे, और जो कि उसने शर्त रखी शादी की कि अगर मेरे कर्जा याद अदा कर दिए जाए तो मैं इस लड़की से शादी कर लूंगा. विकम इज बेसिकली ransoming Lydia. If marriage is always partly a financial ideal, Wickham has taken it to an extreme where he is utilizing this very opportunity and exploiting the situation of Bennett's, where he has seduced their silly girl and now utilizing Lydia for his financial purpose or for his financial gain, because he has occurred a lot of debts, and these debts are to be paid by Mr. Bennett. This is what he has sought through Lydia Bennett. Mr. Bennett says that he strongly suspects that Mr. Gardner has already paid Wickham much more. I guess he suspects that since he hasn't paid anything yet, so who had and who would pay the money, or who had paid the money? Here, Mr. Bennett shows his strong suspicion where he says that Mr. Gardner has already paid Wickham much more. And why would the thing is here that why would Mr. Gardner pay Wickham any money? Why would? What's his stake in this very episode of their lives story? Wickham would be a fool to take less for Lydia. He says Wickham is a very shrewd person. He will not go for a loose deal. He will go for a tight deal. And this time, Lydia will be paid, or Bennett's will have to pay for Lydia's actions more than Lydia worth. The Bennetts are all agree that Lydia and Wickham must marry. But Jane and Elizabeth wonder how they can ever repay Mr. Gardiner. Rest of the family is agree that they both should marry. But these two girls are wondering that how can this much amount of the debt of Mr. Wickham be paid? इतने पैसे पे कैसे होंगे? Mr. Bennett here is left with no choice except paying the amount Mr. Wickham is asking for. Since Lydia and Wickham are already living together in London, Lydia's reputation is already tarnished. Marriage to Wickham will salvage enough of it to save the other Bennett girls from the stain. There is a face saving in this way for the Bennett family if they get married, if these two get married. अगर ये दोनों शादी करें तो फिर तो कुछ बंदा बात कर सके, उनकी तो शादी होगी तो चले गए तो बहाना तो बन सकता है. इफ दे डोंट गेट मैरिड और इफ दे डोंट मैरी, तो फिर इसके लिए बड़ी एक ऐसी पोजीशन है जिसमें लिडिया का चले जाना किसी लड़के के साथ और वापस आ जाना शादी के बगैर बहुत बुरी बात बन जाएगी. Jane and Elizabeth share the news with Mrs. Bennet, who is overjoyed. Look at Mrs. Bennet. When she hears the news of the marriage of Lydia and Wickham, she is overjoyed, rather over the moon, instantly forgetting Lydia's disgrace. फौरी से उसने लिडिया की हरकत को भूल भी गई, उसने क्या हरकत की है. शादी की खबर सुन इतनी शदीद तरसी हुई माँ है शादी के लिए अपनी बेटियों के, सुनते ही वो इतना बड़ी हरकत को भूल गई. That's enough for her. When if one of his her daughters are is getting married, that's enough for her. Asked about repaying Mr. Gardner, Mrs. Bennet dismisses the debt, saying that as an uncle he should pay. Further, debased face of Mrs. Bennet you may witness here. उन्होंने कहा जब लड़कियों ने इनकी कि अब उनका पे कैसे करेंगे जो अंकल हमारे ने पैसे दिए हैं हमारी जगह पे। तो कहती तो क्या हुआ उनका अब्बा नहीं है और वो उनका अंकल नहीं है, वो पे करे इतना तो हक बनता है। वो छोटी-मोटी रकम नहीं है, वो बड़ी रकम है जिसके ऊपर उसने ये कमेंट किया है। मिसेस बेनेट rushes out to make the news about her daughter's marriage public और वो जाके सारे शहर में ऐलान करवाने के लिए भाग गई। अभी बीमार पड़ी हुई थी, उठ के साथ ही कि अब सारे जहान को बता के आऊँ कि मेरी बेटी की शादी हो गई। What a news! What a big news for Mrs. Bennet. In this last part of the novel that concerns gratitude, and Mrs. Bennet is despicably ungrateful, despicably, with her fake physical ailment, where she was faking herself to be ill, gossipy pride, and willingness to overlook Lydia's recklessness, which almost took down the entire family. Mrs. Gardner is her at shallowest state right now. This is her true self, true face, where we can see her vain and shallow character. In the chapter number 50, we find as Mrs. Bennet makes plans for Lydia's wedding, Elizabeth regrets having told Darcy about the scandal. पछताती कि एमी उसको बता दिया, ना बताती चुपचाप बात हो जाती. She expects him to distance himself from her now that Wickham will be joining the Bennet family. अब बनता नहीं इसके मुताबिक वो जो है इनकी फैमिली को ज्वाइन करेगा, जैसा कि इनकी विक्कम इनकी फैमिली का हिस्सा बन गया है और वो नफरत करता है विक्कम से. Elizabeth realizes that she and Darcy would have been perfect together, each capable of improving the other. हाय उस जूद पशेमा का पशेमा होना. A late realization on the part of Elizabeth. Lydia and Wickham reinforce each other's bad qualities. Elizabeth and Darcy, on the other hand, would have complemented each other. Elizabeth's realization of this shows that she has really changed. She thinks that each of us are capable of improving each other. दोनों अगर साथ हों तो कितना ज़बरदस्त उनका एक कपल होता जिसमें वो अपने एक दूसरे की पर्सनैलिटी को मज़ीद इम्प्रूव कर सकते थे। नशा बढ़ता है जो शराबें शराबों में मिले। दोनों ही एक कैलिबर के लोग थे और वो एक दूसरे के साथ मिलके मज़ीद अपने आप को बेहतरीन बना सकते थे। Mr. Gardner sends a letter saying that Wickham has changed regiments to one in northern England and that Lydia hopes they can visit Longbourn on their way. जाते हुए घर से होकर जाएंगे दोनों. Elizabeth and Jane convince Mr. Bernard, who wants nothing to do with Lydia or Wickham, to let the new couple come visit. He is so isolated again here, or careless about, or indifferent to his youngest daughter. Refusing to allow Lydia and Wickham to visit would only advertise the scandal surrounding their marriage. If they don't accept them or welcome them at home, this will actually propagate or advertise the scandal regarding or pertaining their marriage. Once again, कि घर वाले नाराज हैं इनका मतलब पता नहीं कोई मसला था. Once again, Elizabeth and Jane must intervene to ensure that their parents act in a socially respectable way. This was the duty or responsibility or uh, sense of realization on the part of their parents that is to be done uh, by their daughters. उसकी बेटियों को वो सिखाना पड़ रहा है जो कि इनके माँ बाप को खुद सोचना समझना करना चाहिए था. Lydia and Wickham arrive at Longbourn. Lydia is giddy over her marriage. mocking her older sisters for failing to get married before she did. Vikram acts as if he did not did as he did nothing wrong. You see, the character of Lydia, she is shameless, a shameless creature where she is overjoyed and she loves to be called Mrs. Wickham. कि मुझे लीडिया नहीं, मुझसे मिसेस विक्रम कहो, ऐसे कह के वो अपने आप को पुकारे जाना पसंद करती है, एड्रेस करवाती है. एंड शी इज आल्सो मॉकिंग हर ओल्डर सिस्टर्स फॉर फेलिंग टू गेट मैरिड बिफोर शी डिड. और उनको भी मशवरे दे रही है कि अब तुम भी जल्दी से शादी करवा लो. अचानक ही वो अपने आप को सुपीरियर फील करना शुरू कर दिया है. और एज वी नो अबाउट विक्रम, ही इज अ डेस्पिकेबली अ शेमलेस पर्सन. तो वो he is behaving or pretending as if he has done nothing wrong. Lydia is as shallow and senseless as Mrs. Bennet, and Mr. Wickham is just as crass in his own way. They are both shameless creatures. They fit to each other. Yet during their 10-day visit, Elizabeth observes that Wickham does not entirely return Lydia's infatuation. It seems that Mr. Lydia loves her husband more, whereas Mr. Wickham is just feeling the responsibility of being a husband. He is not interested in Lydia as much as Lydia is in him. She figures her he she figures Elizabeth figures he ran away from creditors in Brighton and preferring friendship, companionship, took Lydia along. This is a marriage founded not on love but on opportunity and poor decisions. Since divorces were very uncommon, the relationship will only sour. So they will have to tolerate each other whole of the life, like Colin and Mr. Collins and Charlotte. But this marriage again is an example of a bad marriage. While gloating about the details of her wedding, बकवास करती जा रही है ना, बड़ी खुशी चढ़ी हुई है इसको लीडिया को शादी करवा के. चर्लिश हो गई है बहुत ज्यादा. लीडिया रिवील्स शादी करवा के कई खवातीन बहुत ज्यादा शर्म और भी बेशर्म हो जाती हैं. एंड शी इज वन ऑफ देम. एंड शी इज bickering about every other thing, and while gloating so many things about the details of her wedding, Lydia reveals to Elizabeth that Darcy attended the ceremony. And this is a very shocking and very uncommon news here, a breaking news, you may say. Lydia quickly apologizes. It was supposed to be a secret. It was supposed to be a secret. Therefore, Lydia quickly apologizes. No, no, he wasn't there. But she unconsciously slipped this thing that he was also there. Elizabeth burns with curiosity and writes to Mrs. Gardiner for more details. Why he was there. He was an outsider in this family, and why he was there, why he was attending their marriage. We see Darcy is the absolute last person Elizabeth would expect to be at Wickham's wedding. To be polite, Elizabeth can't directly ask about it, furthering the mystery. Therefore, she writes to Mrs. Gardner inquiring about Mr. Darcy's presence over there. In the next chapter, chapter number 52, we see Mrs. Gardner sends a long reply detailing how Darcy went to London. In this reply, we come to know the whole story or whole backdrop of this wedding, where we see Darcy went to London, tracked down Wickham, and stopped him from abandoning Lydia and escaping to Europe, and then negotiated a deal with Wickham and presented it to Mr. Gardner. Darcy would pay, and Mr. Gardner would take all the credit. Mr. Gardner resisted, but Darcy was firm, arguing that it was in his silence about Wickham's character that set all of these problems in motion. Mrs. Gardner writes that she suspects that Darcy had another motivation, however. So now it is quite clear that Wickham was ready to abandon Lydia. Darcy realizes this, and he realizes that this would wreck the Banners' reputation and totally prevent any future association he could have with them. As Mrs. Gardner realizes, Darcy bribes Wickham in a way, in a sense, you may say he bribed Mr. Wickham to preserve Elizabeth's reputation by offering to pay the whole debt of Mr. Wickham. He negotiated or he strikes a deal with Mr. Wickham, और वो इसका credit भी खुद नहीं ले रहा, and he convinces Mr. Gardner to take all the credit. Mr. Gardner resists on this, but Darcy remains firm in his decision, and not he was not actually saving Lydia's reputation. He was actually saving Elizabeth's reputation. He then refuses the credit out of pride and respect for Elizabeth. अगर वो ऐसा क्रेडिट लेता फिरेगा तो एलिजाबेथ क्या सोचेगी, उसकी नजर में मैं क्या हो जाऊंगा. वो कहेगी कि शायद एहसान कर रहा है मेरे ऊपर, इस एहसान की वजह से वो इसके सामने वो मोहब्बत वाली फीलिंग्स, मोहब्बत खुद से होनी चाहिए, किसी भी फीलिंग से, एहसान के, हमदर्दी के, इमोशंस से बालातर होके, या इनके नीचे दबी हुई जो मोहब्बत होगी, वो एक ट्रू फीलिंग्स ऑफ लव नहीं हो सकती. बिफोर विक्रम लीव्स, एलिजाबेथ encounters him on a walk. She reiterates that she knows his story, but resigned to be his sister-in-law, requests that they not argue about the past. उसको बता देती है सारा कुछ, मुझे सब पता है, और मजबूर हूं कि मैं तुम्हारी अब साली बन गई, और अब हमें आइंदा कभी इस पास्ट को डिस्कस नहीं करना चाहिए जो हमारा गुजर चुका है. Elizabeth will be neither fooled by Wickham or overly prejudiced against him. She shows compassion in accepting Wickham into the family. Next is the chapter number 53, which is our today's last chapter to be discussed. In this chapter, we see soon after Wickham and Lydia leave, Mrs. Bennet hears rumors that Bingley is returning to Netherfield. Mrs. Bennet refuses to visit him, however. She is annoyed, but she doesn't know why is he coming there. Mr. Bennet's pride won't let him visit a man who hurts his daughter, even even though avoiding Bingley is impolite. Not long after, however, Bingley and Darcy visit the Bennets. Mrs. Bennet gives a warm welcome to Bingley and almost none to Darcy. She remains so cold to Darcy, unaware that Mr. Darcy is the one who arranged everything for Lydia and Wickham's marriage, and who is a person who actually saved their family's reputation. She remains so cold or insolent towards Mr. Darcy during their visit. She then goes on to speak glowingly about Lydia's marriage to Wickham, much to Elizabeth's mortification. She is mortifying Elizabeth again. She is embarrassing Elizabeth again in the presence of Mr. Darcy, who knows that it is Mr. Darcy who actually saved them from infamy, disgrace, and arranged Lydia's marriage. But Mrs. Bennet, being ignorant to all these facts, glowing about Lydia's marriage, Mrs. Bennet fails to welcome the person to whom she should be most grateful, Darcy. She commits another social blunder by openly discussing Lydia's disgrace. Darcy is not so congenial as he was at Pemberley. Here he remains very reserved and silent, and Elizabeth doubts he has returned for her. And this time, Elizabeth is very much disturbed because of his not being paying that much attention to her as he did at Rosings and at Pemberley. Bingley, however, warms up to Jane as the initial awkwardness besides. Mrs. Bennet reminds Bingley about having left the neighborhood so suddenly, and he reinvites Bingley and Darcy to dinner. Outside his Pemberley comfort zone, Darcy is a different person. We find a different Darcy at Pemberley, but outside that state, he becomes, or he pretends to be, or he becomes a different sort of person. Elizabeth worries that her mother continues to offend him. As expected, Bingley and Jane rediscover their affection when they are together. Again, they are seen in love with each other again, whereas this time Elizabeth is much worried because Mr. Darcy is not paying her as much attention as he did at Rosings or at Pemberley. In the next lecture, we will see some further uh, mm, discussion on the remaining chapters of the novel, which are very few in number now. I guess in the next lecture, we will conclude or finish our novels discussion. Thank you very much.